I want to begin my remarks with an overview of the forces that I have become convinced are at the core of our new economy. Forces that have changed everything and have made the world we have to deal with seem to be in constant chaos. The most important point I want to make about today's environment is that there is a new world, one in which there is a new reality, one in which everything is different, everything is changed, nothing is predictable, and everyone is affected. Of course, as Thomas Friedman, the New York Times senior foreign correspondent, discusses in his top seller, The Lexus and the Olive Tree, while most of the world is primarily concerned about improving their lifestyles, which Friedman compares to wanting to own the Japanese luxury car, the Lexus, some of the world is still fighting over who owns the olive tree, as in the conflicts between the Palestinians and the Israelis in the Middle East. So even though there is a new world, some of that world is still living with values and interests that are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old. Today, many people argue that we are experiencing the most significant change in at least 100 years. In response, I often say we are experiencing the most significant change in human history, not just the last 100 years. The forces that have led to this world of chaos are all new in human experience, and taken together, not only are leading to a situation of constant change, even a constantly increasing rate of change, but also a world without precedent, so that there are no guidebooks about how to react. One of the results of this constant chaos is that the rules and assumptions we all grew up with no longer give us guidance for understanding what is happening, nor for figuring out what to do to cope with what is happening. Steve Case, co-founder of AOL, has said that there will be more confusion in the business world in the next decade than in any decade in history. And Paul Allaire, former long-serving CEO of Xerox, says we're in a brawl with no rules. It's important to point out that in this world of chaos, no one is exempt. Everyone is affected. As a consequence, we have to create new rules, new understandings, and new reactions. Jack Welch, the well-known former CEO of General Electric, said the rate of change on the outside is the rate of change inside, then the end for the organization is in sight. The implication, of course, is that constant must be central to any strategy for staying alive in this crazy economy. And constant innovation will be at the core of the rest of my remarks today. Thomas Friedman, the author of the best-selling book, The Lexus and the Olive Tree, that I just mentioned, who is the senior foreign correspondent for the New York Times, who writes a couple of editorials about the world every week, says the world is flat, a reality which he says is totally new. When he began his efforts a few years ago to write a book with this title, he went to his boss, the senior editor of the New York Times, to seek permission to take a year off to research what was going on in the world, because he had a sense that something radically new and different was happening. And he also sensed he didn't understand fully what it was. His editor asked him why he needed to take so much time off. Friedman's response was, "My framework for understanding the world is out of date. If I don't update my mental software, I'm going to do something really stupid." For him, that might have meant to write an editorial that would be read by millions of people around the world, that would illustrate his ignorance and be wrong in its interpretations. But if you and I don't update our mental software, we too will do really dumb things. And today, none of us or our organizations can afford to be doing dumb things. So he set off to get a first-hand look at India and China, to try to understand why so much outsourcing and offshoring of work was being sent to these two countries. He started his research in India, interviewing executives, successful entrepreneurial business founders, and employees in many different companies. His last interview before leaving India to head to China was with Nandan Nilekani, Chief Executive Officer of Infosys, one of India's top software and high-tech firms, a firm which started out as an outsourcer for many American, Asian, and European high-tech firms, but which now is a major competitor in its own right. As they were wrapping up their interview, Nilekani said to Tom, "The playing field is being leveled, and you Americans are not ready." On the plane ride to China, Tom kept repeating to himself this phrase: "The playing field is being leveled," trying to figure out what Nilekani had meant. Then, in a sudden flash of insight, Tom said to himself, "Of course, what he's telling me is that the world is flat." And Tom understood the implications. With globalization in business, technology and communication, no one has a major advantage. Engineers from India and China and Russia and the companies they work for are every bit as good as those from Europe, the US, or Japan. Tom reminds us that our parents used to tell us to clean our plates at mealtimes because there were all of these starving millions. My mother would say, all of these starving Chinese who would love to have our leftovers. But today, Tom rephrases the saying. Tom tells his daughter to finish her homework from school, since there are all these hungry Chinese and Indians and Brazilians and you fill in the blank who want your job. This is what it means that the world is flat. Everyone is competing relatively equally for work and business and creating innovations that give them a competitive edge. Over the last 5,000 to 10,000 years, as a human species, we've gone from a hunter-gatherer society, which lasted for tens of thousands of years, to an agricultural society, which has lasted for a few thousand years, to an industrial society for the last 200 years or so, to a service-oriented society through the middle of the last century, which lasted maybe 50 years, and which has been declining since 1956, to an information society, which became dominant by 1976, but which is already showing signs after 30 years of beginning to decline, to what is predicted by some to become by 2010 or 2015 what we will call a leisure society. I presume you notice that the length of each era has been getting shorter and shorter yet, so that today we may be at the point that complete shifts in what people do is occurring within a couple of decades or within every generation. Obviously, this has significance everywhere and for everyone. This is why I refer to today as a new world. Let me illustrate this from the U.S. perspective. The U.S. labor force changed from being mostly agricultural, about 85% 100 years ago, to become mostly manufacturing and industrial work, 75% 50 years ago, to today with 85% in service jobs. And within that, at least 50% in data service jobs, manipulating information. The important point is that this pattern is being experienced in pretty much every country in the world, with some countries a little slower than others, but essentially all moving away from an agricultural labor force through a stage of commitment to manufacturing and industry to a heavily service-dominated labor force. These changes in era have occurred, of course, through the impact of new technology, which has allowed vastly improved productivity. And these forces for change have now created a world where changes in technology and resulting changes in productivity are occurring at such a rapid pace that we are living in a world of absolute and continual chaos. No one can predict what is going to happen, and no one knows what to do to cope with the resulting chaos. So much of what I'm going to talk about today will deal with the nature of the changes that we are experiencing, along with many ideas about how to deal with these changes and some of the many ways in which organizations and their management have learned to cope with these changes. We can't deal effectively with the changes if we don't have a good understanding of what is happening. So first, I will describe my understanding of what is happening. But I hope you will listen to my view with your own motivation to see things from your own perspective and your own understanding. Because of the unpredictability of this chaotic world, no one person's understanding, including mine, will be complete or necessarily correct. Let me quickly summarize the 6 forces that I have identified that are creating this crazy new world with a short description of each of these forces. This discussion is important to laying the foundation for the main purpose of my presentation, course, which is to describe how today's top organizations, large and small, are dealing with the crazy environment created by these forces. The first force I include in my discussion, it's also identified by many other authors and thinkers, is globalization and global competition. Today, all business is global, all ownership is global, and all products and services confront global competition and contain global content. Content in labor, in finances, in components, in customers. Increasingly, people and organizations are taking on a more global perspective, seeing the planet and its opportunities and threats from a global understanding. Now that we can view the Earth from space, it becomes more difficult to view everything or anything from a purely local or national perspective. The United Nations estimates that there are at least 70,000 transnational firms. These are firms with assets in countries other than their countries of origin, and with trillions of dollars in revenues and millions of employees spread across many countries. In addition, of course, one must include in any discussion of global businesses all the businesses that are only exporters or importers or outsourcers and cross-border subcontractors, which pushes the number of global businesses into the millions. Indeed, competition is no longer confined only to large firms from the large developed countries. In last year's list of the top 1,000 global companies, there were firms from over 50 countries. This list, and others like it, only include large firms listed in stock markets. If family and privately held firms and government-owned enterprises were to be included, the list would be much different and would include firms from many more countries. Indeed, if you have a website, you're global, since everyone with access to the internet has access to your website. This reality has taught a hard-learned lesson to many people and organizations. For good example, Amazon.com, who didn't consider the global implications of starting a business online when they started their e-business. The second force for change is the technological and communications revolutions that we and the rest of the world are experiencing. Every field of human study and endeavor is experiencing revolutionary new knowledge and change. New knowledge is doubling every 5 to 10 years, and the digital revolution has created what is often now referred to as the transformation age, changing every job, every firm, every industry, every product and service, every social institution, and the lives of every person. The third force for change is the changing demographics that every country is living with, from the aging of every developed and even many emerging countries to the huge young populations in many developing countries. These population characteristics are changing every institution as well. Indeed, some gurus, such as the management guru, the late Peter Drucker, suggest that demographics may provide the most significant of all the forces. Everything from labor shortages in the developed countries to excess labor in many developing countries, and all the implications of these realities make changing demographics one of the most significant of the forces for change. And again, there has never been a society in human history with either of these characteristics, a rapidly aging population or an almost totally young population. The fourth force for change is the almost universal pressure to reduce the role of government in our economies and societies, which has led a trend to decentralize, deregulate, privatize, and open up all economies to free trade. These pressures have led to transformation in almost all countries and industries, and probably also, through deregulation and smaller governments, have led to the current economic meltdown that all countries are currently facing, and which true believers are still insisting is the right way to go. The fifth force for change is the new source of wealth and income for individuals, for companies, and for countries. This new source is human capital, so that the wealthiest individuals own nothing but stock, typically in companies which themselves own nothing but intellectual property and tremendously creative and productive workers. For example, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. In the past, the route to wealth for countries, cities, companies, and individuals was ownership of physical assets, such as land and real estate, gold, oil, inventories, and buildings. But today this has completely changed. The only route to wealth and income today is through individual and corporate human capital. The last force for change that I focus on is what I refer to as global surprises. These are events which are unpredicted and mostly unpredictable, have global impact, change everything, and affect everyone. And because of globalization and global communication and travel, these events are becoming more common and have larger and larger impacts. These include events such as the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of communism, the attacks on the World Trade Center towers in New York City, SARS and bird flu, the Southeast Asian tsunami and Chinese earthquakes, global warming and dimming, the Asian financial crisis of a few years ago, and the current global economic meltdown. In the words of Anthony Giddens, former director of the London School of Economics, for better or worse, we are being propelled into a global order that no one fully understands, but which is making its effects felt upon all of us. There's no place to hide. No one can escape these forces or their consequences. Everyone is affected. Every employee, every customer, every organization. No one is immune from their effects. These forces are compelling countries, companies, and individuals to consider new ways to view the world and to create new ways to act and react to the changes. The rest of my remarks today will focus directly on the consequences of these overwhelming changes, focusing on some of the ways that companies are dealing with this chaos. It's true for organizations just as it is true for individuals. One of the keys to success requires flexibility and adaptability. If the new world is so overcome with surprise and chaos, then the only route to success is to learn and change faster than the environment changes. Large organizations and long hierarchies cannot make quick decisions or accept innovations and creativity without too many people being involved. So successful companies have found themselves forced into smaller units and flatter organizations with fewer people involved in decision-making and more people solely involved in creativity, problem-solving, and innovation. Fewer managers, particularly middle managers, lead to fewer layers in organizations, which make firms flatter and decision-making easier and more flexible. It also leads to wider spans of control and greater individual and team responsibility. Overall, organizations may keep getting bigger, both through internally generated growth and acquisition, but individual units are getting smaller, with often 50 people being seen as the upper limit for a flexible, adaptable, and creative business unit. But when success leads to sizes larger than this, such units are encouraged to search for ways to diversify products and services with new applications to new customers. And global communications and IT technology allow the creation and use of service centers and centers of excellence for specific specialty requirements, such as HR or procurement, rather than having these services everywhere in the organization. In addition to these characteristics, adapting organizations are also borderless, or at least trying to be so, partnering with competitors, suppliers, and laboratories all over the world in a search for innovations that will deliver world-class products and services to customers everywhere. Because of the pace of change, organizations are organizing around projects that are often short-lived, since no product or technology lasts very long, with life cycles getting shorter and shorter. If you don't provide your customers with world-class products and services, constantly innovating and delivering new solutions to your customers, even before they need them, then someone else, from potentially any country in the world, will provide those services quicker than you, cheaper than you, with better quality than you, and with a wider smile. This need for speed and constant innovation and enhancement means organizations must also be very fast-paced, totally committed to their human capital, and often working through modular arrangements with pieces coming together as needed to accomplish tasks and projects, and informal networks, gathering skills and information as needed. Successful organizations, large and small, today are finding that they must commit to these characteristics in order to be flexible enough to make the changes necessary with the speed necessary in order to perform with the quality necessary to stay ahead of their competitors, no matter where those competitors are located. In this module, I have described some of the characteristics of today's crazy world, including the forces that I think are causes of this craziness. Today's world is characterized by extreme turbulence and unpredictability and continual surprises, which is leading to total uncertainty and ambiguity and constant confusion. Because what we are experiencing has never been experienced before, we usually don't know how to react. Indeed, we are often in denial of the importance of the forces and the changes they are creating, leading to a major potential for disaster and creating what I have referred to as a new world, a world of constant chaos. In another module, I will talk about some of the solutions to dealing with this chaos that stem from actions that managers and leaders can take and that deal directly with the priority that successful organizations place on attracting and retaining the human capital that is necessary for coping with this new and chaotic world.